Diego Ruzzarin is in Mexico, but he's a Latin American man. He's from Brazil, and he is the king of social media there, as well as being a real live philosopher. Diego, great to see you again. Well, which will it be? Is he really going to attack Venezuela?
My friend George, first of all, what a pleasure to be here again. Always great to be on the mother of all talk shows. And answering to your question,
Thank you.
I'll be bold enough to say none of them. I don't think Trump is going to attack neither Venezuela, neither Nigeria. I think for people it's important to keep in mind that the game at play at the moment, it has nothing to do with drugs. It has nothing to do with Trump managing his ego. What we're seeing at the moment is probably a change of power positions going on in the world. And the warfare that we're seeing is at the economic level. And because the war is going on at the geopolitical and economical level, that's why we're seeing all this aggression. So answering to the question, and I really hope I'm right, because in the end, we are humans. We defend life above all. I hope we don't have to see any other worthless wars in the name of American imperialism.
Well, I'm into that, and let's hope you are right. Of course, there are already victims at sea in what, by any metric, are criminal bombardments of unknown vessels with unknown people with their bodies floating in the sea. Some 60 have already been murdered. So that would just be show then. That would just be a display of murderous machismo.
Yeah, I think there's a sentence that will help us understand what's going on at the moment. And it's a sentence by Antonio Gramsci, or a Marxist philosopher. And he said that the past is not quite dead and the future is not quite alive. This is the time of monsters. So this is the moment we are living at the moment. We're seeing a titanic shift in the hegemonic power going from the Anglosphere to the Asian continent, especially in China. And because of the rise of China, the US is absolutely desperate. Absolutely desperate. And in this desperation, and what the US does best, he first sacrifices his allies, and then he goes after the weakest enemies. So this gives us a very overarching explanation to what has been happening for the past 2 years at least. So for example, sacrificing Europe in order to rescue America's lack of competitivity. So they found ways to fund a proxy war in Ukraine in order to increase the production costs in Europe and sacrifice Europe in order to artificially buy let's say a time frame of protection for American lack of competitivity. Because in the end, what the US cannot do is compete directly with China, right? So because they are competing directly with China and they're losing pretty much in every front, the US is completely desperate. So the US is now doing this game that they have played for the past century at least, of inventing targets to justify economic aggression. So remember this very clearly, and this is not a moral claim, this is a historical claim. The US doesn't want to invade you because you're a terrorist. Because they want to invade you, they call you a terrorist. This is what history has taught us in the past. And this is exactly what's going on specifically in Latin America and with Nigeria as well, okay? So this is not an overarching moral claim, this is a historical claim, again. And being very, very specific about Latin America. So what happened is that once Trump took power this second term, he had to negotiate with his backyard in Latin America and in a way make a power move for Latin America countries to break economic ties with China. So Trump was very clear. You either break your economic ties with China or I will find excuses to make your life impossible. So he started with tariffs. The tariffs didn't work out because the countries resisted. Now Latin America, because of Brazil's participation in BRICS, has a certain degree of sovereignty that didn't exist in the past. So the countries in Latin America were able to withstand these tariffs. Not only withstand, but specifically in the case of Brazil, the economy grew even despite the tariffs, because China was able to absorb the extra production from Brazil and the commodities not being exported to the US. China had the strategic economical position of absorbing that excess of production. But some other countries in Latin America didn't have it so easy. Countries with blockades and sanctions like Cuba and Venezuela specifically, they don't have too many economical partners in order to be playing economical games. So breaking ties with China, even going around the sanctions and blockades, it's suicide for the Venezuelan economy. And remembering that the Venezuelan economy has been steadily growing for the past year, even outgrowing the economy of Argentina. Okay, so just so people keep this in mind, the economy of Argentina under liberal rule of Javier Milei has to be rescued with $40 billion. And the economy of Venezuela under socialist President Nicolás Maduro has to be blockaded and attacked constantly in order not to survive. Just so people understand at what point in time we are at the moment. So what did the countries in Latin America did against this economical ransom proposed by President Trump? You either break ties with China or you face the American army. Countries had to decide. So almost a year ago, they started with these conversations about Mexico drug cartels being named terrorist organizations in order to justify military invasion. Okay, so everything indicates that the president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, came to an agreement with President Trump. She imposed sanctions on exports from China to Mexico, and Trump mellowed down on the rhetoric of invading Mexico. But it was not the same for Colombia and Venezuela, because President Petro and President Maduro stand still for their sovereignty and the sovereignty of their people, and reply to Trump that they will decide what to do economically. And because of that, Trump made an intensification on his violent bellic rhetoric, and even like you said, broke several international laws in the face of no repercussion under international organizations, no sanctions, no repercussions at all, and committed crimes against civilians with absolutely no proofs, no justification, and absolute barbaric horror. Okay, why? Because these countries are standing for sovereignty. So at the moment, this is the central question of the geopolitical game going on in South America. Who is willing to stand for sovereignty against the US, and how much is the US willing to risk to push countries away from economic partnerships with China?
Now, China is massively involved in the Venezuelan economy. And Russia less so, but also strikingly. Both have not quite military treaties with Venezuela, but in the Russian case, pretty close to it. Is that a barrier to Trump launching war, that it might actually bring him face to face with China and Russia?
I think so, and I think it plays a role for sure. But something I want to remind our viewers, our kind viewers today, Venezuela is not so easy to invade. The city of Caracas is near the coastline, but is protected by a huge mountain line. So it's not a very friendly territory to invade. And also reminding people that recently President Maduro armed around 7 million people in the country. Okay. Remembering that they love to call President Maduro a dictator, but he gave weapons to 7 million adults in his country. If we go back to Prince Nicolas Machiavelli, this idea of arming the crowd, it's a vow of trust between the ruler and the civil society. So in that sense, it's almost impossible to see a dictatorship directly arming the majority of the adult population of the country. Okay, so just so people keep it in mind. And then remembering that the Vietnamese experience was very traumatic for the US. Going by land into these territories, it's very expensive. And in the US, at the moment, we have to think everything in terms of dollars. They have the biggest debt they have ever had in their lives. They have an absolute disaster economically because they have no productive forces, no competitivity. The only growth in GDP the US have is because of this bloat and this cloud capital that is absolutely inflating the numbers, but is not equivalent to a real growth in the economy. It's not producing jobs. Opening data centers and pounding money into Palantir and OpenAI and all these speculative bubbles don't feed people. They don't move the economy. And in the end, what we have right now in the US, it's a government shutdown and 42 million people standing in line because they're going hungry in the US. Like the army itself is making lines to eat with food stamps. This is the most powerful army in the world at the moment. But do you think American warriors and army men are going to go to war with no pay? This is counterintuitive to the American capitalist culture. They will not go to war for free. They are not sovereign individuals defending what they're proud of. Most of them are going against their will to kill people they don't even know for a war they don't understand, that don't represent their values. This is madness. It's absolute madness. And it's funded only by the interest of capital. But then again, it's counterintuitive to the fact that the US, it's a failing, declining empire. What we're seeing now is how this failure, this decline is unfolding itself. But the movement of history, it's undeniable. The direction is set. And then again, Venezuela is not as easy to invade as people think. And also the frontier with Colombia and with Brazil, it poses a very difficult strategic decision for the US. Of course, if in the worst case scenario, if the US army goes into Venezuela, the first thing they will do is set up American bases in the border with the Amazon forest, which is the biggest reservoir of drinkable water in the world, one of the lungs of the world, as people say. And then again, if they go with this excuse of doing a war against drug lords, they will unequivocally go into Colombia as well. So it concerns President Petro. So it's not only a matter of Venezuela. At the moment, right now, the main conundrum is that Latin America has to understand that we either unify under one geopolitical bloc to defend our sovereignty, or we're going to have a very, very hard decade.
Well, that was to be my next question to you. Now, you and I met at Kazan at the BRICS conference, at which President Lula of Brazil vetoed Venezuela's associate membership. And evinced, well, less than friendly feelings towards President Maduro. Will Brazil stand with Venezuela if it is to be attacked? And will that be true more widely in Latin America also?
Well, I hope so. I do hope so. To be honest with you, I think the movement in Kazan in 2023, it was mainly because of Itamaraty, the diplomatic arm of Brazil, and not directly a decision from Lula. I actually have the theory that that's why Lula didn't even show up, because he didn't have the will and the guts to face President Maduro and tell to his face that he didn't want Venezuela in. So he sent this diplomatic embassy representative in order to make it very, very polite and to say that they were not against Venezuela, but they felt it was rushed and they just want to make sure that every member fulfilled some requirements or whatever. They found a very bullshitty excuse not to include Venezuela. But then again, what Brazil did at the moment represented also the interests of Brazil, thinking that Brazil is in BRICS not a productive force, it's a source of energy. So having Venezuela in BRICS is bringing a competitor into BRICS, right? So Brazil was standing for their sovereign interests, which makes sense, right? It's selfish, it's probably short-sighted, but it made sense geopolitically. Now the situation is completely different, because what we're facing is not bringing an economic competitor to the energy game in BRICS. It's about defending the sovereignty of the continent, which is very, very different. So in that sense, I hope Lula and the team, a diplomatic team in Itamaraty, will see for the near future that if Venezuela is lost, it's a disaster for Latin America. It's a disaster for Latin America. It's the beginning of the end. We are already in Latin America very much balkanized. What we need is the exact opposite. We need unity in order for, in strengthening numbers, we can aspire for sovereignty.